Stinking metal. Damn, it's okay. Woo! Alright, all that's done. That looks really nice. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to GrimLore, the lore podcast for all your grimdark fantasy and sci-fi needs. Hey, Ray! Get out here. Come take a look at this.
Give me a second.
Stop sniffing the warp dust for just 1 second and come take a look at this. Make sure I got it right.
I'm not sniffing, I'm huffing. There's a difference.
Sure. Whatever helps you out, buddy.
Holy, what the?
Well, thanks to Dungle's lovely donation, I was able to build a homing beacon so Shark doesn't crash his ship into the tavern. We have a nice little open courtyard for him to do that. Do you trust his parking job?
I mean, he crashed into my ship once.
Well, one can hope. One can hope. So, okay. Well, I guess you saw the homing beacon, and why are there a bunch of flying lights over in the sky? Did you send Shark an invitation to the tavern?
I have not mentioned him recently. No, we haven't gone to the Halo universe yet.
No, and it's getting closer. That doesn't look like his ship. It looks a little bit fancier. And it's landing. Okay. Well, we know it's not him. It didn't crash. So, do we need to get this?
No, if they want to probe anyone, they're probing you first.
I beg your pardon. Do we need to get our Skaven bouncers out here? And the back hatch is opening. Do we send a welcome party? Some presents, or I feel compelled to kind of want to go in and check it out. What about you?
I mean, could be worse.
Well,
we definitely walked into creepier places.
We have, and we've done creepier stuff. So, what's this going to do? All right, well, let's come on in and see what this is all about.
You are listening to the GrimLores podcast.
Really fancy.
Your lack of faith disturbing.
Well,
yeah, it is.
Wow. The rust on the walls there.
Scruffy looking nerve herder.
I mean, it's had some wear and tear, but it's still a lot better than Shark's ship. He needs to upgrade really bad. We need to take some notes from whoever owns this place. I guess we're following the lights over down this hallway.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Holy, what the hell?
Hi!
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
Hey, this is Jordan.
Holy crap.
Wait a second.
Thanks for joining us.
Wait a second. It's them. Ray, they took our calls.
How's it going, guys? Yeah, we got a transmission from you guys saying you wanted to do a crossover episode, so we thought we'd drop in.
I am sweating bullets right now.
Yeah, literally drop in.
Literally.
That is an impressive lighting job. Then again, we've been dealing with Dungle and Shark. So, I mean, they stay inside the lines at least.
Yeah.
We do our best. It's still a bucket of bolts, but keeps us going.
Impressive. Well, welcome to, I guess, our parking lot of our tavern. And I suppose we'll be leaving the tavern for this one, will we not?
Yeah, we can put a couple of drinks out, Jordan?
Oh, yeah. Basically a cantina in here anyway.
Ooh.
Yeah. All we do is drink and fly at the same time.
Mind if I sample some of these drinks?
Yeah.
They're true millennials.
My people.
Yeah. All right, gents. Well, yeah, thanks for having us guest spot at your tavern, at least in the parking lot anyways, and we're ready to talk a little bit of Star Wars with you guys.
Sweet.
Excellent.
Been waiting so long to do this.
Yeah. So before we get started, let's just a question for you two. I noticed you guys didn't really cover Star Wars before on your show, so just wanted to get a little gauge as where you guys are at and like kind of where you started with the universe.
Haha. Yes. I will gladly discuss this memory. This is a core memory of mine, actually, because it's ironic in a sense. Or as the great Chief Palpatine once said, ironic. So basically, my introduction to Star Wars began with the one Star Wars movie that is on the bottom of my list of Star Wars movies. It began with Attack of the Clones. When I was probably like 4 or 5, the Attack of the Clones movie was like the trailers were playing on my television, and I was like, "Oh, I need to watch this. I need to watch this. This is like such a cool movie." And it was for like Star Wars playing that evening or whatever. So I watched it, and like I was like entranced by it. I remember the Coliseum scene, like I remember it just like stuck with me. And like Star Wars has been a huge part of my life for a very long time. With me rewatching The Empire Strikes Back probably close to 200 times.
Nice.
Yes.
So you started with the prequels then? Is that?
Yes, I grew up with the prequel. I grew up while the prequels were coming out, but I did not watch Phantom Menace until I was much older.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This is the Millennial Falcon, and most millennials did grow up actually watching the prequels. That is kind of many of them were that was their introduction to Star Wars.
It's a great introduction, honestly.
Yeah, like every millennial, I also grew up on the prequels, but I actually knew about it because my dad was a big Star Wars fan, or at least of the original trilogy. So he got the original VHS set, and then and so like I watched that with him, and basically we watched. Of course, I enjoyed all of them. I watched The Empire Strikes Back until like the VHS wore out. And then the same thing with Return of the Jedi not too long afterward, because like of the trilogy, Return of the Jedi was always my favorite. Don't at me. But then of course when and then I got my cousin into it, and she really enjoyed it. And then when we first saw the trailers for The Phantom Menace, when they were doing the prequels, we got so hyped or whatnot, and then we ended up seeing each of the prequels in theaters as well. So that was like Ray, very much a core memory, and just like I've basically been in this since the beginning. And of course, as far as like playing the games, Knights of the Old Republic, Jedi Knight Academy, The Force Unleashed, stuff like just gems like that were just so mwah. So I've always been so engrossed in Star Wars from a very young age. It was like my thing before I discovered Warhammer. So.
Actually, my Star Wars introduction was very similar. We not with my dad, but we did get introduced to the movies, the original trilogy, through VHS, and man, we must have rented one of the Star Wars films at least once a month for like 2 years. Me and my brothers, back in the Blockbuster days when you would rent VHS.
Oh man,
that is like, and then when the special edition came out in like 1997, they were like ramping up Star Wars again, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I think they were trying to basically advertise for the Phantom Menace, because they were planning to release it in 1999. So, but I remember we just went like. We were like so excited about the special edition, which I mean really wasn't all that much extra special, but but we were like going through the special edition movies with a fine-tooth comb, like, oh, there's this special effect, or there's this added scene that wasn't in the original. It was exciting to us, but when you're kids.
Yeah,
I probably would have done that too.
My first introduction was actually the special editions. I didn't get exposed
Oh,
to the originals till after. So
so you didn't
know
see
there were
female Sheev Palpatine?
No, not originally, no. Well, you guys are both pretty well versed then in Star Wars, more or less then.
Yes.
I mean, definitely so. Of course, like I'm not as well versed in the books, but I do know a good chunk of the extended universe lore. A lot of it through you guys, and of course, just through my years of perusing the Wikipedia pages, just for no other reason than just cause.
It's a rabbit hole, Wikipedia.
Very much so.
I honestly love it though, because like that's something I just love about Star Wars. Like you go into Wikipedia and then you like read something because like I agree with you. Something I used to do was I would open a random page on Wikipedia and I would read until I got to the first like highlighted word, and then I would click that one and I would just like continue this like line of extensions to see how things would go. And I remember like not being able to make it through the first paragraph most of the time before I had to jump to another another like topic basically.
Okay. Yep. That's how it goes with Wikipedia.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a black hole that you go down and never come out.
Yeah. The universe is so big that you can get lost very easily with every background character having a backstory. You know, someone appears on screen for 30 seconds and they have a whole history.
Yeah, like a whole trilogy of books.
Yeah.
Or a line of comics, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? The guy who sells death sticks. What's his name? He has like a whole like character arc.
It's something like Sleezo or something. It's very
Yeah, it's like
on the nose.
Sleazebago or something.
Yeah.
That's the other cool thing is like almost every single background character has their own name and like something of a backstory to go off of. That was always something that really intrigued me about the Star Wars universe.
Absolutely.
Ellen Sleazebagano. Sleazebagano.
God.
Yeah. One thing I will say is they've not been very subtle about their names.
Oh, absolutely not. But we love it either way. I do, at least.
Yeah, there's something endearing about when it's like so on the nose.
It's the universe is having fun while you're having fun.
Totally.
It doesn't take itself too seriously until it does. But I suppose that's a little different from what we're going to be covering today. Is that correct? Because we, I think our topic for today is going to be something a little interesting, is it not?
Yeah. Since we usually cover grim and dark topics on our end, mostly the dark fantasy because of Warhammer, but with Halo and Destiny and all that too, we, our range is very broad. So, what would you guys like to talk about? Since this is more your forte, we don't want to step on your toes. So, by all means, whatever you want to discuss, we're happy to hear it.
The Star Wars setting.
Yeah, well, you know what? Star Wars, even though it doesn't necessarily fit, let's say, the grim dark genre, there are definitely some grim dark elements within it.
I would say there's like grim dark story arcs. Yeah, the universe itself it's not 40K for sure.
Definitely not, but
No.
Yeah, 40K is typically, like, the whole phrase grim dark obviously originates with 40K. And is typically, I guess according to Wikipedia, is just a subgenre of speculative fiction with a tone, style, or setting that is particularly dystopian, amoral, and violent. Which I wouldn't necessarily say that describes Star Wars, but like as Jordan mentioned, different arcs and certain characters can, I guess, be classified as grimdark for sure. Since Star Wars, like we mentioned, is so big and so vast, there's a little bit of room for almost any subgenre in it.
I've seen the what's it called description, the phrase that Star Wars isn't just a story; it's a setting that almost any story can be Star Wars. And I think that like series like Andor really like epitomize that. That Andor is a Star Wars show, but it's also a drama. It's a character piece. It's a Star Wars has those. It has so much range.
definitely like you got the fantasy with the sci-fi coat of paint because with like the Jedi Knights, the monks, the wizardry. You got the Western element, which is basically Mandalorian. You got the criminal element, which is like Andor and like all the bounty hunters and stuff. So it's like there's a whole range you can do with it. That makes it really cool.
Yeah, there's even like, if you really want to go out on the curve there, like if you go into some of the old comic books, like about Naga Sadow and Marka Ragnos, it's like there's this very Egyptian aesthetic as well, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, there's all sorts of That is kind of the fun thing about the Star Wars universe, especially the expanded universe, is that you can kind of jump around all these different genres. I mean, I've even thought about like just in my own head, like you could do like crime noir if you really wanted
Oh,
to,
that'd be
you
so
know, like
cool.
there's so many possibilities with it.
Absolutely.
Oh, that'd be a fun thought experiment if we ever have you guys on. Just like
Oh
let's
yeah.
write a crime drama in the Star Wars universe.
This makes me flash back to like that one particular section in Knights of the Old Republic where you're basically like solving a murder mystery for as a side quest.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
Jedi detective, a Jedi murder
I
detective.
mean, that's exactly what that side quest was like. Like I'll let Christian and Jordan get it, discuss that if they want to, but that's basically exactly what it was.
Yeah, that was on Dantooine, right? It's like one of the first planets when you get off Taris, I think on the first game. Um in the plains of Dantooine. But yeah, it's there is like yeah, and actually there's lots of stories too where like the Jedi are like tasked as the detectives oftentimes in the Star Wars universe, like that's their job is to like go and investigate crimes and whatnot. So yeah, there's there's definitely that as well. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just there's so many possibilities that you can explore.
Yeah. That being said, too, also there is a very core element of Star Wars that does kind of have that like black and white morality, which kind of contrasts with like the grimdark, which always tries to do like shades of gray or like there are no good guys. You'll often hear as a phrase talking about 40K, which is something we also can debate. But that is a general idea out there. Whereas Star Wars like really tries to do that like black and white morality, like there's obvious good guys, obvious bad guys, which doesn't necessarily, like I said, doesn't fit the grimdark narrative necessarily, but you can tell those kinds of stories too alongside the overarching grand narrative or space opera that is Star Wars.
I
Very
mean, I
cool.
think that I seen this interesting. It's not a speculation. It was an analysis anyway, but it was covering the Rogue One, which is probably one of the better Star Wars movies from the new era. And it was that the Force itself has a will, which I think it's basically been we're all aware that we can agree that the Force has a will to an extent, and that you can actually see spoilers, I guess, for anyone who hasn't seen a Rogue One, but all the characters die, but you can actually see the analysis was you can see the exact moment the Force stopped putting like attention on them, and the idea that the Force itself has almost like inherent biases can almost be in itself like kind of existential and grimdark from some speculations where it's like if there's an existential force that's guiding the universe and like giving like basically controlling destiny and it can just on a whim like you've done what you need to do, you're on your own and you just die, that in itself can be almost not grimdark, I suppose, but horrifying to in its own extent.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of like existential dread that kind of comes with whether or not like people really have free will. And that is a topic that does come up. Like, can people act of their own agency or is everything guided as the will of the Force?
Knights of the Old Republic 2.
Actually, and Christian, I don't know if you had this. I don't think you had it in our notes here, but I think one like actually grim dark story really is actually Knights to the Old Republic 2, which in my opinion is the superior of the Knights of the Old Republic games, but that's just my opinion. But if you look into like Kreia, who's uh essentially like a nihilist, right? And one of her disciples is literally called Darth Nihilist, and he like consumes all life. And yeah, there's like it's kind of very dark and very philosophical, and like really gets down into like super deep questions, which is like kind of surprising, and I think tells a really good story. But it is it I don't know like I said before, like there's all these possibilities that you can explore that I feel like doesn't get explored enough, and whoever ended up writing KOTOR 2, I thought was like a visionary. Whoever wrote those characters, just to like kind of go off the beaten path a little bit with Star Wars, and just Freya, who is like, in like the hero's journey, you have like the you sort of have the typical format where there's like the hero, and then there's the guide, and typically like it's Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And then it's or in Phantom Menace, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn. But in KOTOR 2, it's you're the outcast, and then your guide is Kreia. She actually ends up being the primary villain as well. So I don't know. It's just like a very interesting subversion of expectations, and also getting like into deep philosophy. And if Ryan Johnson ever wanted to learn anything about actually subverting expectations, he should follow the creators of KOTOR
honestly,
2.
Kreia would have been so cool. Like, I don't know very much about her aside from the fact that like she like wants to kill the Force.
Yeah.
But by destroying the Force, you essentially will destroy all life in the universe, right? Like it's a very nihilistic sort of. And she like feels like she has to do this. And I highly, highly recommend everyone go. There's this like 2-hour documentary that came out years ago on YouTube. That's called The Philosophy of Kreia, and it went like super, super viral. And the YouTuber, it's like some weird no-name YouTuber, but he just put out this one, like he put out a few videos. He doesn't have many, but he put out this one that went like super viral, and it was like 2 hours long. It's like just an examination of Kreia, and it is awesome. Like I highly recommend everyone go into that. But again, yeah, it is very, very grimdark.
I was just gonna say I'm really glad that you actually brought up KOTOR 2, because even though like my preference would be for the original, I think because the development was so rushed and it was kind of like half finished when it came out, that's kind of what took a dip for me. But just like the sheer like, this is probably one of the darker end of Star Wars stories that you could probably get, when you have the likes of Kreia, Darth Nihilus, who can eat the life force of any planet, Darth Sion, that just continues on by by pure willpower, despite like he has broken every single bone in his body and he is like horribly scarred and mutated. It's just like ugh.
Yeah, like the mirror of Sion is like he survives, but he also suffers deeply just by his existence.
After all that's happened, still you live. You are difficult to kill.
And it deals like with like genociding entire species. It's like it really is like like I don't know. I feel like it makes you feel a little more about the sort of depravity and the chaos of the universe.
I also enjoy, well, not enjoy, I shouldn't say enjoy, that could easily be taken out of context, but I definitely admire the darker topics they cover a lot more in the Old Republic, particularly with what is it? Is it Vitian or Vitiate, who has his army of child soldiers of Force-sensitive child soldiers, or the eugenics program of the Empire? Like, there's a lot of darker topics, and I guess unexpectedly, you don't expect that from the setting when, like we've just gone over, you have Yoda pretending to be an idiot, for lack of a better word, smacking R2, acting like a total like random animal. But then at the same time, below the surface, you have all these darker topics that are just waiting to, be explored, be given even further depth and explanation over the characters they affect.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got mail.
Oh, Scion is so cool.
I guess just on the KOTOR 2 topic too, it also deals a lot with like the morality of war too, which like you're saying, it's that contrast with like Star Wars is very like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like almost campy when it talks about like space battles and like it's fun and exciting. But then a game like KOTOR 2, where you have like, and even KOTOR 1 talks about it a lot with like Karth and and Candace Ordo.
Yeah.
They're always debating like
Yeah.
the philosophy of war and what that cost really looks like to people. And yeah, it just sheds away kind of some of the propagandistic nature of warfare.
The Clone Wars.
Speaking of anti-war in a sense, we have the Clone Wars series actually, which some of my favorite episodes are about the clones and the nature of war and the for example, like one of my favorite episodes that I always like to rewatch is the Lerman episode, which I'm not sure if you guys remember that one or how recently it's been since you guys have delved into the Clone Wars animated show.
Been a little bit, jog our memory.
Yeah. The Lermans
We've done
are like
episodes on it.
Oh, yeah,
Lermans
yeah,
Actually
yeah.
watched
totally pacifist
Been a
race or
while.
whatever. And just the nature of it doesn't matter the whole overall nature is their peace should be the end goal, but instead they're just war on both sides. And it doesn't matter if you want to be neutral, it doesn't matter if you take sides, you still get caught in the crossfire of war. And I think that's a fairly I don't want to say it would be a fairly grim dark topic for all these effectively innocent civilizations that are really caught in the conflict that they want no part in or have no stakes in. And that could in itself have its own level of grim darkness where it's you could be on a planet completely completely minding your own business and I know where you're caught between the separatists and the clone army.
Yeah. Even actually on the topic of the Clone Wars, there are a few episodes that deal with some pretty dark and heavy subject matter related to war. And like you're saying, they don't, not that they don't ever, but they rarely delve into what the cost is to the civilian populations. It's usually kind of glossed over with oh, we're the good guys, and then they just bomb entire planets until so.
But trust us, we're the good guys, Yeah.
That's for the good guys.
To be fair, the original trilogy, I mean, there is a Holocaust of Alderaan and stuff like that. It's not like there isn't any kind of dark themes, but yeah, like Christian mentioned earlier, it's all couched in very black and white, good versus evil terms, and it is very cartoonish almost the way it's presented. But I would say, just to give the devil his due, there is a little bit of if you really think about it, destroying a planet of billions of people with Alderaan.
Well, not only that, but we see we've seen how the Death Star blows up planets from the ground. Like in Rogue One, we see what it's like to be on the surface when the Death Star explodes. How many people are on Alderaan, and then the impact happens.
And I will give Disney or whoever the director of that movie was, that was an excellent scene when they're blowing up. I can't remember the name of that planet, but when they're blowing it up, it's an awesome scene.
I can almost remember because I remember playing Battlefront 2 and enjoying that map.
Yeah, Jeddah.
Jeddah,
yeah. To be fair, also that wasn't the laser at full capacity. That was just one of its sub lasers. But
yeah, right.
Yeah. But it was still very cool.
It was just it was a cool looking scene,
Yeah.
Just
that movie
it's
is
the strongest of the Disney films for sure.
I will give Disney this credit. They do a pretty good job of making Darth Vader and the Empire pretty terrifying, especially when it's random rebels or anybody that's not Luke, Leia, or Han. They make the Empire and Darth Vader really terrifying.
I actually like the Obi-Wan show because it showed how scary Vader is.
We won't get into Obi-Wan now, but
let's not get into Obi-Wan. I don't want to get vented off into space.
I don't hate it as much as some people. I don't think it was great. I will
no,
say
it wasn't great.
I didn't hate it as much as some people, but be that as it may, I did think it had a couple really awesome scenes, but also, again, Rogue One had just some awesome scenes, like when Darth Vader is boarding the blockade runner. Come on, that is just the red lightsaber turning on with the fog. That you can't beat that, man.
Oh wait, actually, to add to that, this is funny. It's funny. Something I pointed out. Vader's his chest plate, his rebreather device. When the lights are on, that means that he's breathing. That means that his machine's providing life support. when he does the introduction, his breathing apparatus isn't on. He's just breathing
Oh, I
loud.
never thought of
Someone
that.
pointed out,
Yeah.
and someone pointed out that he's literally holding his breath. That is Vader literally turning off all of his lights, literally making himself suffer to get the jump on these like random rebels. And it's like,
Except,
Anakin,
wait,
why are you being
hold
such
on,
a
hold on.
drama queen?
No, but hold on. Is that totally true? What? I have to go and watch that scene, but I thought in my memory you hear his breathing first.
Yeah, you hear
Was
his
that not the case?
breathing. From what I understand, from what was pointed out, was that he's breathing, but he's suffering. He's basically letting himself suffer to get to horrify them even more by them not seeing the lights. Is how it was pointed out. Because when when it's on, that means that the life support is working, but when it's off, that means life support has been turned off.
Oh god. Yeah, he's just like barely surviving so that he can. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's hilarious because it's like, why? These are just random rebels that are gonna kill. Not these are random rebels you're gonna kill in 2 seconds. Why are you trying to horrify them?
Don't ask questions. Just let it be a great scene.
No. Vader feeds off of the fear of others too. All Sith do.
That's
So
true.
if you can intimidate your enemy,
He's off the
definitely.
fear. Is he just a drama queen? Like being dramatic.
The answer to that question is yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
I
in
just
the
wanted-
vacuum of space. My cape must be moving.
He's using the Force to do it.
I would not be surprised.
Before we move into Vader, actually, because I did have him in my notes as being his existence also being a grimdark kind of element of Star Wars.
Oh, it's a
I just wanted to
horrifying element.
circle back to the Clone Wars really quick as well. I know you mentioned the TV series, and there are a couple of other episodes too that do touch on like the horror of war and stuff, but also the Republic comics that predated the Clone Wars series had some pretty interesting and dark storylines as well, especially around the planet of Jabim, where you kind of get the other side's perspective, the separatist perspective, and just like how grinding and brutal combat was there. Bunch of Padawans, which are essentially kids being forced into the front lines of combat, kind of how they suffer through it and how they all die. Their evacuation kind of has like elements of Vietnam when the Americans pulled out of there.
That kind of does
you
bring
have like
up
all
some
these.
interesting questions, because I know Ray and I have had discussions like this, but when you think about the Jedi, what they do as far as like recruiting basically like anyone younger than 9, like no attachments or whatnot, but then all of a sudden the Clone Wars breaks out. You're a Padawan? Oh, you're automatically commander in charge of this many clone troopers. Oh, you're a Jedi Knight? You're a general in charge of this many clone troopers. So it's just like, what? Like, where does the thought process go? Like, I want to be inside the brain of someone who thought that would have been a good idea to put a freaking kid in charge of like hundreds, if not thousands, of clones.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's presumed that they're wiser than a typical 9-year-old, but yeah, there are some ethical dilemmas with putting the weight of people's lives on a 9-year-old's shoulders. That being said, the whole thing about the clones too, we bring it up in our podcast as well, kind of being a grim dark thing that gets overlooked, is that they're essentially a slave army of children themselves. Mature wise, they are older, but they are like grown for a singular purpose, which is war. Their purpose is to live and die and be disposable. Which is
They're also indoctrinated as children.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're a slave army essentially. So you have a slave army fighting for freedom, allegedly. So
it isn't just a slave army. They're also technically eugenics. They're eugenically born because they're made from I think isn't not
Jango Fett.
Boba Fett. Isn't Jango Fett supposed to be by their like summations the best bounty hunter, the best Mandalorian they have? So they're automatically getting someone whose genetics by their own metrics are superior to everyone else. And then they go even further by removing certain aspects of the clones to make them even better and even more loyal and even more.
And curbs their free will essentially too.
Yes, their free will and their personality too. So it's just like how much of a clone's personality is actually their own, right? Like how much of that is their own and how much of that is programmed into them effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, they touch on that on
Yeah,
some of the Clone Wars episodes too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, there are some clones that are sort of presented with having more of an individualistic personality. But yeah, I don't know. Make of it what you will. I will say also, like, Clone Wars does have a couple other, like, if you think about the Witches of Dathomir and the Night Sisters and stuff like that, there's a few dark themes in there, peppered throughout that series. That's a little more Halloween, if you will.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's more horror than necessarily grimdark. Grimdark is more to do with like bigger questions of like morality. They can be horrific. There can definitely be overlap, but horror in its own sake, I think, is a better description of the Witches of Dathomir, which goes back to what we were saying about like Star Wars has a lot of space for subgenre.
Yeah, I suppose so.
I mean, I would argue the witches do have a degree of like grim darkness then, because you have Mother Talzin making a voodoo doll of Count Dooku and literally watching it melt over an open flame, and you can see the same thing happening to Dooku in his chambers, literally like his face melting, and as he's feeling the heat.
Wow, that's messed up.
Like that is okay. I don't like Dooku personally. I think he's an okay person, but he's not my favorite character. All hands on the table, but like. No one needs to feel their face melting like wax.
You should listen to our Dooku episode and see if that doesn't change your mind a little bit.
I've actually listened to it. My opinion on Dooku still remains the same. Like,
okay,
he's one of my favorite characters, but he's not. I don't like. He can be my favorite character, but I don't like him. Is the best way to put it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I would say that's more of a dark element necessarily than grim dark.
What is grim dark?
And let's get into it. Like, what is the distinction between something like horror and grimdark? I know you briefly touched on it there, but at what point would we be leaving the realm of grimdark and entering horror, or vice versa?
Well, I'm not the arbiter of what is or isn't grimdark. I would say there's a lot of overlap between genres too. So there could be like an area where things exist beside each other,
like a Venn diagram almost.
Yeah, exactly. Like there'll always be a little bit of shades of both in certain areas. So I wouldn't be like this is or this isn't, but certainly I would say if it's like 300 for example, as a movie is very violent. And even though violence is a hallmark of grim darkness, I wouldn't necessarily classify 300 as necessarily being grim dark. It has hope. It has themes, heroic themes. There are, whatever the history is, that notwithstanding, you have heroic characters that are quote unquote good guys and you have quote unquote bad guys, right? Like there is a clear delineation. And then I guess for horror, which isn't, I'll admit, my strong suit, I've never been a big horror person. Typically there's moral lessons in horror. There's some good content creators that are escaping me right now that definitely talk about like themes around horror, but typically there's a moral lesson being taught, which is interesting because your mind doesn't typically go there when you're looking at like a slasher film, but usually the general themes are like, rowdy teenagers who are acting outside of morality tend to suffer some kind of brutal consequences, kind of the general horror element. Again, I'm not a scholar on horror, but yeah, which is different than grimdark, which is like violence for violence sake, and or the moral lesson being that there are no good guys, everyone suffers, everybody dies, there's no underlying hope or lesson to be learned.
See, I kind of agree to an extent. I view grim darkness as, like you were saying, violence for violence' sake. But for me, I view something as falling into grim dark when it almost becomes satirical in a way. Like, someone can get, for example, go to 40K, for example, someone can get killed by a chainsword. And in like one movie and depending on how it's presented, that could easily be like, oh, he just died. Like he just died. Well, that would be dark. Like someone just getting killed would be dark. But with the almost gratuitous and I want to say satirical nature of 40K, like, it isn't just, oh, I'm cutting you with a chainsaw sword. No, it's, oh no, there has to be like blood. There has to be viscera. There has to be, there's an extent of exaggeration to it. It's almost like reveling in its own, not in like a gratuitous sense, like a nihilistic or a morbid sense, but in a we're just here for the fun of the exaggerated violence to an extent, or just how extreme things can be.
Would you say like a director like Quentin Tarantino fits that bill?
I think so. Yeah. For me, I kind of view his stuff as grimdark, particularly Kill Bill, which I find to be it's an incredibly like violent film, but the violence is never aside from the very first, like aside from Kill Bill Volume 1, which I find the first half hour or so to be a little too, it's almost like too dark for my taste, but then it shifts to like grimdark in a satirical sense. Then I find like I'm typically on my phone or like out of the room for the first little bit of Kill Bill, and then I'm sitting down with popcorn and enjoying the film.
I love both the Kill Bill movies, but that's just me. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I'm taking off my Star Wars hat and putting on my Warhammer hat here for a second. I think Grimdark is actually the evolution of what Warhammer was. So 40K started as satire, and Grimdarkness is actually kind of that 90s veneer that kind of covered everything, like comics, movies, TV shows, that moved it away from the humorous elements, the satirical elements, and made it more a universe unto itself. I definitely agree with you where like Grimdark is that extra layer of extreme. And I think it does teeter into the realm of the absurd, which you can find humorous, like absurdity is humorous to some people, but it's also not, it's different than satire, right? Like satire, you're making fun of an underlying ideology or theme or something, where you go into early 40K, where that's very clear, where they're riffing on politics of the time or like different genres of the time. Whereas like once it moved into the 90s is when this kind of grim dark definition came from, was like this layer of like, no, we're taking this seriously. Like Space Marines are serious about their fanaticism. They're moving away from like the satire and the comedy and more into the extreme.
They love the Emperor
for its own sake.
Yes. For me, I view it as like there's two types of grimdark. The grimdark that's like for people who are in on the joke, and then people who aren't in on the joke, which is I think 40K doesn't struggle, but like there are definitely some authors who have varying opinions on where the grimdark goes from we're being very serious in the grimdark, and then we're taking the fun with the grimdark. That's just, but that would be just my own definition, because
yeah. I mean, there's certainly an element too where we've come full circle now, where things got so grimdark again. It moved into the absurd, where people are like, okay, that's just stupid, but like funny stupid, right? Like, let's see how extreme we can go with this. Mentality takes over, and then it moves back into humorous. So it's almost like a big circle as well.
Yeah, like a pendulum almost.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think, speaking like to bring this back to Star Wars in a sense, I think that the Starkiller base, it's like the Death Star, because we just went over discussing how Rogue One was like a brilliant movie I think it's an objectively great movie, and we see the Death Star in not even at full capacity, and the very nature of it being not at its full capacity is like horrifying, because we see from the ground level how horrifying the Death Star can be. But then you have instances of Starkiller Base where it's, oh, this one Death Star is the size of a planet, and it can blow up an entire solar system. It's like, okay, that's cool. Like that's horrifying, but like, why a whole solar system?
It's like
it starts to move into the absurd.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's like it's just extreme enough to where we're kind of like blowing up a planet. Holy crap, that's terrifying. Blow up an entire solar system. It kind of ruins it for me.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Sun Crusher from the expanded universe.
Isn't that with Revanhead?
That was the Star
No,
Wars.
no. This was like
Starforge.
that's the Starforge. This was like post the original trilogy. I'm just looking up kind of when it.
Is that the Dark Empire one? Is that Dark Empire?
It wasn't introduced in Dark Empire, but it's, I think, timeline-wise is closer to Dark Empire.
Okay.
like maybe just
Yeah,
after
yeah,
that.
it's around the era. Yeah, it is after that, I believe. It's maybe 20 years or something, 15 years after the original films. That's the setting. Anyways, it's like this indestructible cone-shaped ship that fires a special sort of torpedo that goes into the core of a star or a sun and basically causes the sun to go supernova and destroy the solar system.
Okay.
Again, it's one of those things that it has divided fans. Let's say there are some who don't like this, and again think it's just like upping. It's sort of similar to Star Killer Base, where it's like needlessly trying to up the stakes because the stakes have already been raised so high, so you have to like find something that's gonna raise the stakes even more. But I at least appreciated the Sun Crusher in that it can be manned by one person. It's like relatively small. It's maybe the size of the Millennium Falcon, maybe even a bit smaller than that. And it's very hard to detect and catch. So in that sense, it's like kind of different than a like huge
Battle station.
Yeah, battle station that's like the size of a moon, right? So
Yeah, or the size of the planet in the upping of this ante, right? Like
yeah,
same thing.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
they just get bigger. Okay.
Yeah, it's like very subtle and covert, and that's actually what makes it so dangerous, is because you can never detect it, and it can just come in and destroy your entire solar system, right? So the Sun Crusher was actually destroying solar systems before Star Killer Base. Just
doing it before it was cool.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there was sort of that idea of like, okay, if we up the ante, let's destroy an entire solar system than just the base. But I think the Sun Crusher was a lot more innovative than Star Killer Base, if that's what you're gonna do. You know what I mean?
Okay. I was gonna say I prefer the Star Forge personally than the Sun Crusher because I find
Oh yeah,
that
Star
is a
Forge is
cylinder.
sweet.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a cone. Yeah.
That was kind of like Boba Fett's ship, but slightly cooler.
Yeah.
But nah.
Again, people
I
weren't in love with it, but
I mean, I think Ray was kind of dipping into this, but like Star Killer Base kind of like combined the idea of the Star Forge and the Sun Crusher, but just in the way that just felt like they were just rehashing the Death Star, but now it can destroy solar systems. Woohoo! But yeah, I like the idea of the Star Forge a whole lot better.
I do too. Yeah, I think like sort of like the almost AI manufacturing facility is kind of a cool idea if you're gonna do a super weapon.
Imagine you're just a planet. Like, let's say we'll do Coruscant. Let's say you're a system on Coruscant. Next thing you know, this ship like teleports in or like hyper speeds into your system, and it has like a small fleet protecting it. It starts eating your sun. So your sun, 8 minutes, whatever later, the sun's getting progressively dimmer, and you're like, oh no, it's eating our sun. But at the same time as your sun is dying, so everything's getting colder. It then unleashes an army of mechanical droid, or like a mechanical army of mindless droids that immediately go to war with you and start slaughtering you in the darkness of your dying solar system. Like, that is way more horrifying than, oh look, my planet blew up.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot slower of a death. I was also going to mention it's just also the opposite of like planetary destruction in the sense of like the function of the Star Forge is to create, right? It's through that creation that it is a risk, whereas the Death Star just destroys. So
I think those are. I think I prefer the Star Crusher more than Star Killer Base, though. I can I can get behind that.
All this, like,
I think conceptually it's cooler.
Oh, definitely. Cybernetics.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
With all this terrifying technology, like, you can also like apply the grim and darkness of Star Wars to a much smaller scale, like cyborgs, including Vader and Grievous, which I think, Christian, you were going to touch upon at one point.
Yeah. Sorry, we went off track there.
Hey, this is GrimLore. We are fantastic at getting on tangents. So
yeah. No. Just the idea of like Vader's suit is built to keep him alive, yes, but it's also meant to inflict constant pain and discomfort, both, right? So it's like intentionally made to keep him in a state of pain all the time to keep up his dark side energy. Also, so that's just the physical, but also like Darth Vader himself, Anakin Skywalker's such a tortured character. He's lost everything. Like he lost everything that he loved, everything that the whole reason he turned to the dark side is taken away. And so he's physically disfigured, physically destroyed, as well as emotionally completely obliterated as well. One of my favorite scenes is a comic book where he's fighting an apparition of Darth Maul. And like there's kind of a contest, and like Darth Maul is typically portrayed as like this external hatred that he uses to make him a menace. And Vader beats him, and then Darth Maul's like, "Who could you possibly hate more than what I hate?" And Darth Maul's like, Darth Vader is like, "I hate myself."
Oh, I
Which was
remember
always
that
kind
line.
of one
That
of my
was so good.
yeah. I love
honestly,
that panel.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of the Revenge of the Sith novelization.
Ooh, yes,
where
he's bringing it up.
the last passage, or I believe it's either the last passage or the last couple chapters, but the entire book, from Anakin's perspective, they talk about this dragon that ate this existential dragon that ate a sun or whatever, because the sun went a sun turned into a black hole anyway. And the entire book, you have Anakin contemplating, or anytime there's depression or any type of anxiety that he suffers, he can feel this almost like existential dragon circling him and like crushing his chest, crushing his heart. And the last passage of the book is the dragon wins. This is what it's like to be Anakin Skywalker, and it's just him as Vader. Just I wish I could do the passage justice. I'm gonna try and find it just to.
Yeah, not just that. It's just like when it's describing like the pain that he's feeling inside the suit. Then it ends with, "This is what it's like to be Darth Vader forever."
Yeah.
Yeah, while you look for it there, one thing too I didn't mention is how Vader actually beats Maul is he actually stabs through himself and stabs Maul, which goes into the whole like I hate myself, right? So, to be Darth Vader is to be suffering again, not just physically. Like Grievous, like you said, is a kind of a comparison of that, but also emotionally just destroyed.
Oh yeah. Like Grievous is one of my favorite characters, although I fully admit he's very one note and that he's just a cyborg Jedi killer that's meant to be like the prequel mirror to Darth Vader. But like when you go into like his comic backstory of like he was just like a warlord for his people. He's trying to help them out against the Huck. I think that's what they were called. But then the Republic came in and kind of screwed all that up because Grievous and his people were made out to be the aggressors. And then so like he loses a lot of his people. He joins the Separatists in like some hope of trying to help his planet out. Then like his shuttle gets blown up as like sabotage. So he's like completely broken. And then he's put into basically what is kind of like a prototype cybernetic body that would later go on to be perfected, or more or less for Darth Vader. And then like he explicitly wanted his mind not to be altered, but then the Separatists just mess with that anyways to make him more aggressive and more angry all the time. So he's not living a good existence either when you like really see it, when you really read into his backstory.
Even with the whole sabotage thing, like he was betrayed by his own, which I mean is typical for, it was Darth Sidious that sabotaged his shuttle. And yeah, just he was this optimistic freedom fighter essentially who gets turned into like a weapon by an external force that just wanted to use him and discard him after as well. So
yes, you also have the narrative theme of his heart being the thing that makes him become a monster, the love of his life, his love for his people being the thing that lets him go through with the procedure to become a cyborg, that very heart being the thing that kills him when Obi-Wan shoots him. But I found the passage.
Lay it on us.
I'll try my best to give it some gravitas. You loved her. You will always love her. You could never will her death. Never. But you remember. You remember it all. You remember the dragon that brought Vader forth from your heart to slay. You remember the cold venom of Vader's blood. You remember the furnace of Vader's fury. And the blackened hatred seizing her throat to silence her lying mouth. And there in one blazing moment in which you finally understood there was no dragon, and that there was no Vader. There was only you, only Anakin Skywalker. And you rage and you scream and reach through the Force to crush the shadow who destroyed you. But you are far less now than you were. You were more than half machine. You are a painter gone blind, a composer gone deaf. You remember where the power was, but the power you can touch is only a memory. And so, with your world-destroying fury, there's only droids around you that will implode. And the table on which you are strapped shudders, and in the end, you cannot touch the shadow. In the end, you do not even want to. In the end, the shadow is all you have left, because the shadow understands you. The shadow forgives you. The shadow gathers you unto itself. And within the furnace heart, you burn in your own flames. This is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker forever. The long night has begun.
Yeah,
That's
pretty
some
sick.
great writing.
I've heard good things about the book version of Revenge of the Sith. I've never actually read it myself, but
It is a phenomenal read. It is, in my
Yes.
opinion,
it
is the
excellent.
canonical best version of Revenge of the Sith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, it is fantastic.
I'll have to pick it up sometime.
I will say, like, Grievous's depictions outside of the films give him a lot more justice than the films himself, and they probably just didn't have time to really flesh out his character. You know, he is very one-dimensional in the films, but yeah, like you guys were talking about, they sort of flesh out his character and his motivations a lot better in the comics and the novelizations.
Well, even like the newer CGI Clone Wars cartoons kind of waffles back and forth on Grievous sometimes, but like more so like the OG Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars shorts, like really showcase what kind of damage that Grievous can do. Which, of course, that's my favorite version of him, as is probably a lot of people's favorite version of him.
And if we're going to be talking about cyborgs, should we bring up the Dark Troopers?
Yeah, I guess it's a good time as any. But before that, I just want to mention real quick on Darth Vader before we move on from him, and kind of from that passage you wrote, or not wrote, you read.
I wish I wrote that.
Yeah. The as much shade as we're throwing at the Kenobi series, and not to rehash it, one good part of it, which is also itself kind of rehashed from other Disney content, is that ending duel where Anakin kind of confirms that like Darth Vader isn't this alter ego, like Darth Vader is Anakin, which speaks to that kind of reading into from that passage there.
Yeah.
But
pretty dark, pretty sad.
Yeah, pretty grimdark, I would say. Dark.
I actually quite just to know, I did quite enjoy that like final fight scene between Kenobi and Vader. Personally,
it was okay.
And
I've seen better.
For me, my only issue with it, I thought it was phenomenal. My only issue is I wish that Vader would have thought he killed Kenobi, because I don't like the idea that Vader knows Kenobi is just out there still. Like, yeah, like at the end of Revenge of the Sith, like he knew Kenobi was out there somewhere, but they were just left. Like before Kenobi arrived, they were just like gone. They were separated for long enough that I could imagine that like when they meet each other again in A New Hope, there's enough gravitas behind it. There's enough distance between them. Whereas with the introduction of Kenobi and Vader knowing Kenobi is out there and just seen him, I feel like it removes some of the initial weight from A New Hope that I feel like could have been salvaged if Vader would have believed he killed Kenobi.
100% agree with you.
You were the chosen one!
That last episode was in that whole series was a wasted opportunity. And
the whole series was a wasted opportunity.
I won't get it. Well,
we haven't done a review yet of it, but we will.
I don't want to debate it here, but I do think it was so close, but yet so far. So,
I think it had very high highs and very low lows that made it kind of a rubber band for me.
Definitely.
Fair enough.
But yeah, kind of going back to the whole cyborgs thing. Actually, I have two kind of notes that delve into the grimdark. So the first is Dark Troopers. A lot of people might be familiar with Disney's version of the Dark Troopers, and admittedly, even in the EU, where they're either depicted as kind of robots or as exosuits. So in Star Wars Legends, they become these like almost like Space Marine power armor. Like they're massive exosuits that stormtroopers can actually get inside of, which is pretty cool. But so there's phase 1, 2, and 3 Dark Troopers, which is like the robot versions and like the exosuit versions. But not a lot of people know about the phase 0 Dark Trooper, which is what they did is they took like critically injured stormtroopers / clone troopers and essentially Darth Vadered them into Dark Troopers. They feature a lot in the Battlefront games.
I do remember that. So kind of like
Is that what they are in the Battlefront games?
So basically that's like a Stormtrooper Dreadnought, if you want to put this in 40K terms.
Yeah, a lot smaller, but kind of same idea. I'll even read this quote real quick here. And I probably won't give it the same gravitas as Ray there, but I'll do my best. To return aged veterans of the Clone Wars to peak condition, their limbs and organs were removed and replaced with cybernetics, using much of the same technology used to transform Darth Vader into a cyborg. In some cases, over 70% of a clone's body was replaced. With their years of combat experience and cybernetic enhancements, the units that did make it onto the field were undeniably effective. So you almost have like a RoboCop syndrome there. If you guys seen the newer RoboCop, not a super great movie, but that scene where he sees himself
mid, kind of, it's mid.
Yeah,
I like the old ones where you have what is his name, Eddie Murphy? Not Eddie Murphy. That would be an interesting movie where for the initial part of the movie he's like totally robotic, whereas in the newer interpretation he's like fully human, or he's like fully aware.
Yeah,
like has some self-awareness. I did not like that. I preferred where he was fully robotic and then gained his sentience returned, or his self-awareness returned.
Yeah, I definitely prefer the older RoboCops, but there is that one scene where he sees himself and all he is left is like a hand and his internal organs and his brain, but the rest of him is like obliterated. And this goes for Darth Vader and General Grievous too, but just to have like all their body parts removed and just kind of like the fear and like the horror of seeing yourself as like being all your parts removed essentially.
Yes. Horrifying, having your parts removed.
Yeah, and again, up to 70% of a clone's body was replaced. And it also says that like it's not necessarily just injuries, right? Like if anything, it's an improvement to have a robot arm if you lose your arm. But if they also take your legs and your other healthy limbs, like there is an element there of like, was that necessary? Again,
it wasn't necessary, but it was sure efficient.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's all to make you better.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Yeah. The other thing too is the fact that those are like clone veterans. So, they give their lives, and again, they're kind of essentially slave soldiers, and then that's how they get to retire, is just gone through the meat grinder again.
Thrown back on the front lines again. And honestly, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Invincible series. Minor spoilers, I guess, if you guys are watching it. Maybe just, ignore me for a second. But there's actually a character in the series, a minor side character anyway, who finds out that he himself is basically a dark trooper. To give an example, that on basically every mission he dies, and he keeps getting brought back to life, more and more machine, just constantly being brought back with more and more parts of himself being made more and more machine, and he loses more and more of himself each and every time. You could easily see the dark troopers like. I would not be surprised if the dark troopers like, oh, this is your first mission as a dark trooper. You get like you succeed in your mission, but for the most part you're blown apart. Well, what stops the Empire from just taking whatever's left of you and rebuilding you?
Throwing you back in again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the Invincible series too, by the way. But yeah, I am caught up.
That's
so
good.
Not a spoiler, but for anyone listening, for sure. On that note, carrying on with the cybernetics, body horror kind of stuff. Another big one that not a lot of people might be familiar with are the Bomar monks. And this one creeps even me out, like when I first encountered it. So there's a scene in Return of the Jedi where there's this kind of spider-like machine in Jabba's palace that's kind of walking around and behind. Again, this is like in the background.
Oh,
and
I remember that.
If you look closely, yeah, there's a brain floating in a jar in the middle of this spider machine. And that's all you see. That's all that there is. But if you look into the history of them, the Bomar monks are a religious order that is trying to like reach this level of enlightenment where they they kind of get so far into their own head that they kind of remove themselves from all physical reality. And so, like, they live a very austere life. They're the ones that actually built Jabba's palace. It's a temple that they built. And then Jabba kind of takes over and they kind of tolerate it because they don't really care about, like, more mortal concerns. Their minds are always, like, philosophizing and, you know, just thinking for the sake of thought. And then it translates into essentially what they do is they surgically have their brains removed and put into jars and then get put in, like, a giant room where they can just think forever. And it's like the highest form of enlightenment. And if they ever need to move around, sometimes they like to pace or whatever, is that then those spider machines will pick them up and carry them around Jabba's temple, just kind of like contemplating things. But they don't retain, yeah, they don't retain like their eyes or sensory. Like their point is to cut off their sensory organs. It's just a distraction from like pure thought.
So they're just comatose, basically.
No, they're fully conscious and aware and thinking. That's the whole point, is to be thinking, but without the distraction of being able to see, without the distraction of needing to eat, without the distraction of like feeling anything around you.
That's like those World War I and World War II stories where someone is like, their body is dead, but their brain is still alive, and they're just like, they're just aware. That is horrifying. What the?
But they willingly want this.
Yes, that's the whole point of it, and it gets worse. So, as bad as all that is,
oh no!
And actually, Ray, that analogy is perfect. I believe you're referencing. I can't remember what it's called. If it was like a short film based off of someone's experiences, where essentially they had all their limbs blown off, their eyes put out, they couldn't talk, they couldn't hear, so they were like cut off from the outside world, but obviously still alive. And it's something along the lines of like, I have no mouth and I cannot scream, or. Mm-hmm. Yeah, something along those lines. I can't remember exactly how it's phrased.
That story actually made it into a music video for a Metallica song. I can't remember if it was Justice for All or One, but like the whole music video is about that World War I soldier. One? It was One?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's One.
Yeah, I've seen that too, actually. Yeah. Yeah, so again, to make the story that much more horrific, at least for most of these guys, this is their goal. Like, they think they've achieved some kind of enlightenment by doing this. But sometimes one of the monks is not fully enlightened, and they only realize halfway through the procedure that they don't actually want this, but they obviously can't go back. So they're essentially put in a jar and they're screaming mentally, but they have no external way of expressing it. So their minds are just like locked forever, thinking and screaming, but unable to engage with the outside world.
Yeah, that sounds like torture. Like,
which
no
goes
external stimuli. All you
that
have
sounds
is your thoughts.
That sounds horrifying.
This is just from a
Put me in the
background.
Matrix, please.
This is just from a background barely droid thing that you see in
character.
Just a background character. Good grief.
Yeah.
This is what I mean by I love Star Wars, but oh my god. Yeah, I'd rather go in the Matrix than that.
Good.
Yeah. Honestly, it's one of the most horrifying things that's just like there in the background of Star Wars that like not a lot of people know about. Like I said, and it's like the temple that Jabba lives in, it's a pretty remarkable building. So like people who watch the films like are aware of the Bomar monks without actually being aware of them, that they exist.
No, that's very interesting.
That's wild.
Yeah, those guys are definitely probably the more grimdark thing than the other topics that we had.
I mean, forget about Sith Lords and cosmic abominations. Good grief. That's making me squirm right now.
Hey, don't insult cosmic abominations.
I'm sure we'll get to that, but still, that just that was just weird. Anyways.
Yeah. Have you guys ever heard of locked in syndrome? It's kind of like that, where like
I have not.
It's where you're conscious,
vaguely aware of it.
Yeah, you're conscious. Your mind is conscious, but for whatever reason, there's a disconnect with your body. So, like, at least in that case, you can hear and feel things. It's horrific in its own way because you can feel and hear, but you can't externally emote. People don't know what they're doing. So, I guess sometimes some people talk about where they go into surgery where they're fully conscious, but they can't scream or tell them to stop. So they go through their surgery completely.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And for some people, it's like at post. Like maybe they're still on some kind of drug that keeps them in this kind of state of comatose state. So they're not necessarily being actively worked on, but they can hear their loved ones talk to them. They can they're fully aware of like the room they're in, but they can't open their eyes, they can't talk, they can't do anything. So they're just forced to sit there. But at least with those things, you have that external stimuli. Whereas in this case, or in the case of where you're also like blind and deaf, like you're completely locked in and have no external stimuli whatsoever, which is its own kind of special horror. Other fun fact, just while we're on the topic, anyways. So the science of medicine around, I forget the term for it, but like morphine, like painkillers and like stuff that puts you out of consciousness, anesthesia, is not actually fully and deeply understood as we might think. And a lot of there's a theory, an internet theory, I'll say. So I don't know, like if it's medically vetted.
A game theory.
But a lot of people theorize that essentially anesthesia is like locked-in syndrome, where people can feel everything, but the anesthesia makes you forget after the fact.
Oh, that is interesting.
Very interesting. I'm gonna have to ask some of my colleagues about that. So,
yeah, like I said,
I had anesthesia a couple times when I was like 5 or 6. For a couple of procedures I had when I was a kid. So that's kind of terrifying to think of.
Yeah.
Maybe I did actually.
I had the laughing gas anesthesia when I was a kid to have some teeth removed, and I actually woke up during the surgery. Like I opened my eyes, I can feel like the orthodontist like tugging at my mouth or whatnot. But like they quickly realized that I was waking up, so they quickly put me back under, and then
double the dose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to sleep. Back to sleep.
Good sleep.
Yeah.
Good
Again,
sleep,
I don't
good
know how real. I don't know how real that is. I've read it online, so who knows? It could be a. Talk to your actual doctor if you want to know whether or not you're conscious during surgery. Not to spook anyone that's on the verge of surgery either.
Honestly.
Yeah. Actually, one more horrifying thought, just while we're here.
Oh, no.
They actually didn't start administering anesthesia, even localized anesthesia, to children until very recently. I believe the 70s. It was believed that children don't experience pain the same way adults do. So they did like all kinds of surgeries and stuff on kids and babies.
Wow, that's messed up.
Prior to like I think the 70s, which is like pretty recent.
I remember reading about that for some research papers. That was some. The only thing more grimdark than Warhammer is real life.
Oh no!
I was gonna literally say the same thing. Yeah.
The Yuuzhan Vong.
Do you know who wouldn't use anesthesia on you? The Yuuzhan Vong.
Yes.
That is true.
Those guys. Well,
I've been talking to Jordan. You want to delve into the Vong?
Yeah, I can. We had our notes on them, right?
Yeah.
Are you guys at all familiar with the Vong at all?
Yeah, they're like extragalactic species that were they're very big on like biomechanical or bioscience, and they have like a hatred for anything like artificial, like droids. And basically like the Vong War was like a huge ordeal and killed like I think like trillions, like somewhere in the trillions was the number I rember reading.
I think it was 30 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a galaxy. It was like an existential threat, not to like a political system or a planet, but like to the entire galaxy. Yeah, this is like one of the things Star Wars sometimes suffers from. After you have the Death Star, how do you raise the stakes? So
Sun Crusher
Vong is like, yeah, Sun Crusher,
and then you
Killer
introduced
Bay. Yeah, Yuuzhan Vong. Just kind of like some of our notes, like they were body horror in the extreme. All Vong technology is strictly a result of biological engineering. The species, as a religion, despises artificial and non-biological technology. They also find pain as part of their rituals and impose it upon themselves and others. There's kind of like a lot of Dark Eldar parallels, and aesthetically similar to homunculi and their flesh craving. Also Necron and Tyranid parallels, as well as Cenobites from Hellraiser. there's a lot. I've always kind of thought more like Nids, just because they're, or even orcs, for that matter, just because they're like purely biological. Like they're almost like not technological at all. So
Oh yeah, they're like
yeah,
squigs because they have the snakes that could be like the squigs almost. Well, not the same, but
yeah, yeah. They're obviously like they're not the same, but
yeah,
like
Similar.
just a very biological component to the Yuzhong Vong. And that is what makes them, like, it is interesting. I do think the Vong are interesting in the sense that much of the Star Wars stories, especially like the original George Lucas stories, and many of the other ones too, like Knights of the Old Republic, even if you go back into like the Dawn of the Jedi era, into the Legacy eras, there it is a lot about like technology and like this fear and almost techno skeptic worldview, where it's like technology and industry is what's going to destroy the species. But with like the Vong, it kind of flips that on its head a little bit, in the sense that they're like purely biological, and they're actually like religious, like ideologically anti-technology, so yeah, but in any case, the Vong like came in from a different galaxy. They weren't from the galaxy far, far away. They're from an entirely different galaxy. And Christian, I don't remember, how long did it take them to get there?
Countless millennia later.
Yeah, like but they're like self-replicating, right? So they can like hypothetically go forever, so which makes them so dangerous.
And they build these giant world ships. And by build, I mean they grow, because again, they live.
They
like
grow
these
them.
world ships are alive, and all their spaceships are alive too, for that matter. And then they just go from their galaxy into the Star Wars galaxy, crossing through like the great void of space to conquer the new galaxy. Well, less so to conquer, I would say it's a more incidental conquest. It's like they're wandering and then they run into the galaxy, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna terraform each world as they conquer it. It's not like they came explicitly, I guess, on a path of conquest, but once they discovered that the galaxy far, far away was there, it was more incidental.
yeah. My only thing I don't like about the Yuzhang Vong is the concept that they are so evil the Force even doesn't want to react with them. Like that's something that is both like really cool in my opinion, but it's also like, okay, so hang on, you're telling me that the dark side, which is a path that some might deem unnatural, has limits? That's my only that's only ever been my critique of the Vong, was they're too evil that even the Force doesn't want them. That's the one thing that always like lost me.
I always interpreted that as, and I think this is partially from, I think it was Eckhart's Ladder, was a YouTuber, a Star Wars YouTuber that I learned this from. It's like, think of the Force as like very intrinsic to the galaxy far, far away, but whenever like an outside influence like the Yuzhong Vong come in, because they've never had that experience with the Force just doesn't, like, certain powers like Force lightning or whatnot can work fine. Lightsabers, I mean, they're very resistant to it, are fine, but anything else, because it's like they don't have that intrinsic connection to the Force, that's why it doesn't work. That was my interpretation of why Jedi were having a hard time with them, but I could be wrong. So,
I mean, there is a little bit of contradictory sort of like lore there too. It's like, because hypothetically the Force is supposed to be in all life everywhere in the universe, hypothetically. Maybe that's an assumption or a presumption on my part, or it's only localized to the galaxy far, far away. But in my assumption, it was it should be in all, the Force should exist in all life everywhere. And yeah, you're right. The Yuzhong Vong like sort of maybe violate that law that was seems to have been established.
Yeah,
But
like if they would have I don't know, because like I've only ever read the first book in the Yuzhang Vong like war era, but if they would have like emphasized more that like maybe, because if you can easily say that they were cut off from the Force or some extent like that, but like they could have said they were like necromorphs to some extent, like they were like undead, because then it doesn't violate the idea of like, oh, they're. Because I do agree with you, Jerome, where it's like if all living things, because I agree with the same sense that the Force is in all living things everywhere. It binds the universe together, not just the galaxy, but the universe together. So for there to be something that violates or doesn't fall into the category of the Force, or something that like the Force itself is like something that is anathema to the very concept of the Force itself, which is what the Yu Zhang Vong are to, like by what we're told, they should not be alive.
I really love that idea of them. They should have been this kind of undead Force. I think that's 110% the coolest.
I mean, when you look at the art,
retroactive
they
canon
kind of
change.
do look like vaguely undead. Like it's weird.
Yeah, they definitely have a vampiric kind of theme or zombie type theme with like their skeletal faces and exposed things. A couple of thoughts on that though is so that's not the case, unfortunately. I think that's a really good idea. They were at one point connected to the Force, and then they were cut off from it. So it does then tend to the idea that the Force is universal. I do have my own issues with that too, because in theory, if all life in a galaxy, well, then you're going into like concepts of like get life developing independently in other galaxies versus like universally being developed. So like all life in this Star Wars galaxy would have come from like a single source, in that you have the whole tie with midichlorians and that being the binding material for all life within the galaxy, but not necessarily the universe. That being said, the Vong were at one point part of the Force, and they were cut off through their religion and their and so maybe not the undead theme, but it is kind of their worship of the idea of death, which is, like you said earlier, like it's strange that like it's not dark side. I think the difference is that that's almost like the difference between like a theist, an atheist, and then an anti-theist. So you have like, you know, Sith are still on the spectrum of the Force. They just use a different part of it, whereas the Vong are moving away from the Force altogether.
Yeah, that's actually that seems like a very good analogy, where it's like, yeah, you're still like the dark side is still part of the Force, whereas the Vong, their religion is not the rejection of the Force, but is something that is divergent from the Force.
Yeah, but again, it's all kind of like vague, so like that's also me sort of reading into it a little bit myself. I could certainly be wrong, but just kind of to lend some explanation to it. But I honestly, man, I think your idea of like undead is probably the coolest like way they could have or should have done it, to be honest.
Well, because I've made a habit. This was happening to me a few years ago when like Disney was really pushing their Star Wars stuff. I was really trying to get my foot in the door, effectively to try and work at Disney. So I was actually writing scripts for Legends content that I would canonize, and how I would try to write it into the canon without upsetting what Disney was doing. I started with Revan, and then I went on to the Vong, and my rewrite of the Vong was that they were zombies or necromorphs to an extent, and that their practices or whatever made them zombie-esque broke them off from the Force, and that's what made them resistant to it. And the idea was that they procreated by killing things, and then almost like in a Tyranid sense, they collected the organic matter and like Frankenstein's together their race. And if they ever needed like a particular enemy, or if they ever needed a particular like unit to deal with a problem, they could always Frankenstein up that particular bioform effectively, like as an example, to use like Warhammer as an example, to challenge that enemy.
Yeah, kind of Tyranid-esque, which is also another parallel to being this external threat.
It was Tyranid mixed with zombie was what I was imagining them as, but I kind of gave up on that dream.
Looking at this artwork here too, like I didn't really think of it before, but like especially this first one that I posted, like I'm getting a lot of Drukhari vibes from this, which I'm sure there might have been a little bit of an inspiration, but like it's very like the vibe is very uncanny too when you're talking about like Tyranids, the undead, and just the body horror and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, they're like almost a cross between like the three 40k factions there. Going back to what you were saying there, Ray, They do kind of do that adoption of enemy biological grafting. They graft on their conquered enemies into themselves if they consider you like a worthy opponent. So that does exist.
No, I understand.
Yeah, they're
My thought
very.
process that there was, why if they kill a Jedi, wouldn't they get the Force? Not the Force, but the metachlorians and stuff, which is in the whole.
I don't know all the rules around it, but I know that they do that practice. Like if the Force like leaves their body, from a severed limb or whatever, how the details of that actually work. But they
That would actually be interesting.
Yeah.
If like that's why they got cut off in the Force, like because the reason why they hate AI is because AI rebelled, right? So like maybe I don't know. This is obviously me just spitballing because I obviously haven't gone too far into using Vong War aside from the first book. But it'd be interesting if their reasoning was the reason why they got cut off in the Force was in order to make sure that they kept fighting, like keeping up with the AI uprising, was by continuously grafting. Like if you're injured, very similar to how we were talking with the Dark Troopers. Well, like let's say I get my limb blown off. Well, I can't recover my limb, but Gerald's dead and his limb's fine. Okay, well, I'll graft on his dead limb to my limb. And it became like an almost ship of Theseus thing over the course of generations, where how much of the Vong is necrophagic matter, and then the other half is like living matter, and that's why the Force doesn't work on them or something.
You'll become your very own Rayway the Grafted there.
I love that, honestly, man. That's if we could go back and retcon that in, I 100% would be behind it.
Hey, if you guys ever want me on to, if you guys want me on to retcon lore, I'll happily spitball some of my ideas.
Yeah.
I think the like sort of conceptually, people were thinking more vampires than zombies, but yeah, probably maybe going back and doing zombies instead of vampires would be like a better idea. Like they are kind of like vampires. They can like infest other people with their bioengineering when they attack you. It's kind of like the Borg from Star Trek as well. The Borg are on the opposite end of the spectrum in that they're entirely technological and mechanical, and they like infest you with nanobites or whatever. I can't remember what they call them in the show, but and turn you into a Borg, right? And like that's what the Vong do, is they infest everything with their like bio matter and like turn everything into Vong. They even they turn entire planets into like Vong farms, so but it is more it almost strikes me more as vampiric than zombie. But yeah, if you went and I agree, like that's not a bad idea if you kind of went more for the zombie route than the vampiric route.
I mean, I think the zombie route would be more fitting than what they had, because I think that zombies being undead would be it would fit a lot more with the whole concept of the Force being life and them being death. They could easily be like the ultimate enemy.
Yeah.
And then you could even do some like really fun like symbolism with and thematic battles with like the Force, dark side of the Force being a pathway to, unnatural means of immortality, where like the dark use the Force for immortality, whereas the Vong use stitching dead matter to them for immortality, kind of thing. Like you could have so many different, they could be a really good foil to the Force.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
I love everything about that.
Yeah, sorry, and I do want to mention one more thing. There is like kind of a fun fan theory about the Vong, and about like Palpatine and his whole like plan to conquer and rule the whole galaxy, and that he actually was aware of the Vong and was trying to prep the galaxy and bring them under this sort of like authoritarian rule so that they could actually mount a resistance against the Vong. And that's actually why he was so brutal and dictatorial, was because like he knew what was coming and no one else did. And so anyway, just a interesting thought experiment.
Nice job busting that up there, Rebels.
I like that theory. But I also don't like that theory.
I got one thing on the Vong too, but I'll let y'all finish that part real quick.
That's all. That's all I had to. I just wanted to mention because it's kind of fun. But
I just don't like it because it justifies Palpatine and all the awful things he does. But then I also love it because it justifies all the awful things Palpatine does. But then I also don't like it because I'm very much a George Lucas kind of guy where like I will almost always defer to him unless I prefer my reading of something more. And when George Lucas says, well, when he says his comments, I kind of agree with him. So when he says that's not how something works, I go with him.
Yeah, I definitely get that. But the only other Vong thing I had was like, and this could very much be up to interpretation, but there's like one dialogue in the original KOTOR where you're talking to Canderous Ordo of one of the Mandalorians, and he mentions they were in a scouting party at like the very edge of the galaxy, and like they were after some kind of pirates or something, and something came alive in like an ice field or whatnot that like did not register as anything mechanical, and then it just zipped like away out into the void so fast they thought about going after it, but then they realized, this is beyond the edge of the galaxy. We're not stupid enough to go past that. So a lot of people tend to think that might have been a Vong scouting ship from like thousands of years in the past.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.
So, interesting thought experiment.
I don't remember that, but I want to go on YouTube and see if I can find that scene. Because I don't remember that, but
you have to go through his dialogue a lot, like to level whenever you level up, and he'll eventually tell you that story.
Okay, interesting. That's probably like an Easter egg that the writers left for people who would know.
I'm not so familiar with the timeline because I think KOTOR was kind of out around the time of the Yuuzhan Vong stories were being released, so that might have been an Easter egg / connection to it.
Could have been, yeah.
Kind of another note too on that is Admiral Thrawn and the Chiss Ascendancy also ran into like scouting vessels as well. So that's where like if the Emperor isn't redeemed by like prepping for this external threat, kind of giving that over to Thrawn to be kind of like masterminding, like preparing the remnants of the galaxy to take on this new challenge. And then obviously he gets killed before that can happen. But
Thrawn's such a cool character. I don't like how he dies.
Yeah, definitely.
It was honestly, it was like, you know what? If you guys ever want to talk about Thrawn, we'll talk about Thrawn. But his death was disappointing to me.
Yeah,
can definitely save him for the next crossover.
Yeah, for sure.
I finished the first 2 books of the Thrawn trilogy. I just have to finish the last one. But yeah, I do like Thrawn.
Here's a not so much a spoiler. The first one is my favorite. The second one kind of drops down a little bit, and then the third one is a great finale.
Okay, good to know.
Like it's almost like it's really good. It's really good. Just enjoy the books. It's good.
Will do.
Before we wrap up here too, just one more thing talking about the Vong's physical appearance. There's definitely like Geiger-esque elements to their like form and the way they look. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Geiger's artwork.
Yes,
it's very
subtle.
Yeah, like, and for anyone listening to like anything like related to the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise, or if you've played the video game Scorn, where everything's got that like creepy biomechanical vibe.
Biopunk, I think it's called. I think the actual genre is called biopunk.
Yeah, definitely Vong fit into that, which is like disturbing on its own.
You've got mail.
Yes, the stuff that gives me nightmares as a child.
Yeah, definitely. If people haven't looked it up online, your listeners should definitely go look up Geiger-esque artwork, and it will keep you up for a few days.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
It makes me uncomfortable to look at.
Yep, that's definitely a horrifying note to kind of.
A fitting note to end on.
I think we
remember
should probably,
everyone. The Vong are coming.
So I think we should probably head back to the tavern to make some prep work for it and give myself some sleeping ale because I'm going to need that to be able to sleep tonight. So,
I mean,
He'll need
I'd
a
rather have
lot.
the Vaughn and the world than the end times.
Hey, Ray.
I'm going to talk about it.
I'm kidding. but yeah, thank you guys for joining us and landing in our parking lot for the tavern. Do y'all have anything that you want to shout out, like your patrons or anything, or shoot, like this is basically free advertising for our listeners, for you guys. So
yeah, you guys are awesome.
Oh yeah, just I mean, reach out to us. We're on most of the big social medias. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram. We're on Discord. If you go to any of those platforms and just search StarLores, we should be one of the first ones to pop up. Even if you go to Google and search StarLores, we'll probably be the first one to pop up. And follow us, reach out to us, DM us. We love hearing from people. You can also support the show, patreon.com/StarLores, and $3 a month, $3 a month, and you can become a member, access to all the bonus content, and you could also subscribe on Spotify, and we take one-time donations on PayPal as well at starlorespodcast@gmail.com. I think that's about all the plugs we got for our show. You want to plug your stuff?
Sure. Since this is going to be going on y'all's feed too. So for the StarLores listeners, if you happen to like Warhammer Fantasy, any kind of dark fantasy really, Halo, Destiny, Dragon Age, more Star Wars, you can check us out. GrimLore. We're on Discord. We're also on Instagram, and you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, pretty much anywhere that you can find a podcast, you can find us. And we do have open house on our Discord, so just message us if you're interested on our Patreon. For like as little as $1 per month, you can basically enjoy like all the perks of like early access. You can guest on our show if you want, and then we do have like a $5 and a $10 tier, and they just have their own little special rewards too. So feel free to check that out. Patreon.com/GrimLore and all that good stuff. So.
Just our Discord's also open for anyone who wants to hop in, enjoy the chat, sit down, have an ale or anything like that. It's always fun having people. We love getting new people in. It's so fun.
Good deal.
You gotta send me your Discord link. I gotta join it.
You got it. I will send that out and momentarily. But I'm sure Christian and Jordan here have a long journey ahead of them, so we'll let them head out, and we'll go back and hope EXO hasn't burned down the tavern yet. So
we'll have to return to their galaxy far, far away.
Yep. But hey, the tavern's open to you, gentlemen. If you ever want to come back, I will be sure to waive all the docking fees, just like I had to do for Dungle. Anyways,
thanks. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So generous.
Yeah, thank y'all for coming. Really.
We'll get blue milk in stock. Waiting for you guys to come on next time.
Yeah, I'm gonna try.
I'm more of a Java Juice guy myself, but
well, I'll take a few of your samples so that way I can recreate it for the tavern whenever y'all come back.
Drinking space alcohol now. This isn't good.
That just makes my dwarven heart happy.
All right. I guess we'll return to the tavern then.
Yep.
Let you guys take off.
Yep. You gentlemen have a safe trip. Don't fly into any asteroids.
Try not to. Take care, guys.
You too.
See ya.
Bye-bye, guys. Woo-wee. Wow, those are some pretty cool guys. What do you think, Ray?
They are fun. Hey, do you think they needed this? It's a little chip I found under the dashboard.
We'll store that. Make sure EXO doesn't get a hold of it. And wait a minute. They're flying away. Why am I still seeing a bunch of red beady eyes? What are all these Skaven doing out here? EXO? What are you doing?
Get that thing and bad
why is Toasty here? What's going on?
It's our turn. You're coming with us.
Ray, I'm scared.
The rat said we need your ship for this trip. Get your crew quick, you simpletons, and stop the portal. Stop squirming.
Great Horned One be praised. The portal is open. Send him through.
Time to get some more skull.